Just last week, I made a video in which I concluded that the Labour Party could and would never allow a full and proper national inquiry into this scandal. The reason being, it would expose their complicity in everything that's happened in this country over the last few decades. Now, just yesterday, I was completely vindicated, completely proven right, because Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, the Labour Home Secretary, stood up in Parliament and she announced that there were going to be 5 localised inquiries into 5 towns in the UK.
But we will also provide stronger national backing for local inquiries where they are needed to get truth and justice for victims and survivors.
Now that might sound like progress. It might even sound to you, if you're being fooled by this, like that's what we wanted, right? It is not what we wanted at all. This is, in fact, just another attempted whitewash. And in this video, I'm going to show you just how bad it is. So how did we get here then? Well, we got here because Keir Starmer used a 3-line whip in order to force his MPs to vote against a national inquiry. But the problem for Keir is that when it was put to polls, the public overwhelmingly support the idea of having a national inquiry. 76% of them want one. Now, this pressure clearly seems to have affected a few MPs because 3 of them broke ranks with Keir Starmer, demanding that we do in fact need a national inquiry. And that pressure has clearly cascaded to the government, and that's what forced Yvette Cooper to say that we were going to have 5 localised inquiries into 5 separate towns. Although strangely, they don't specify which towns. I'll come back to that. Now, remember what Keir Starmer said about those who were demanding national inquiries. He said they were jumping on the far-right bandwagon. So does this mean that the Labour Party are now also jumping on the far-right bandwagon? Well, unfortunately not. Like I said, this is a whitewash. It is a joke. £5 million to conduct 5 inquiries in 5 towns. This is the biggest crime and the biggest scandal that has ever hit this country. £5 million is absolutely nothing. They're happy to give £3 billion a year to Ukraine, but only £5 million to investigate very serious crimes in our own country. It's ridiculous. For perspective, the Telford inquiry, 1 town, that inquiry took £8 million to get finished. So how do you expect them to produce 5 inquiries for even less money? It does not make sense, and it is because they are not serious. They just want the problem to go away. Another point, remember that Oldham Council requested the government conduct an inquiry into the Oldham scandal? Yeah, the request that Jess Phillips denied and said they should do one themselves. Well, there's 2 reasons why they wanted a government inquiry and not a local inquiry. The first is this: Oldham Council themselves cannot guarantee that no member of their own council team or local police force or whatever didn't know about these crimes or wasn't involved in these crimes in some way or another. And so those people could be on the inquiry team covering up for their own crimes. If you think that's crazy, it's not. In Rotherham, 2 police officers were arrested, charged and subsequently sentenced for exactly this. Now, the second reason that a government-led inquiry is better than a local-led inquiry is all to do with the kinds of powers that the local inquiries do not have and that the government inquiries can have. I'll let Chris Philp explain it. He stands up in Parliament, he's the Shadow Home Secretary, and he gives a great explanation.
We now believe as many as 50 towns could have been affected, so ICSA barely scratched the surface. Now, the Home Secretary just announced government support for only 5 local inquiries. Let me say, this is wholly inadequate when we know up to 50 towns are affected. So I have some serious questions for the Home Secretary. Firstly, how are the other 40+ towns supposed to get answers to the questions that they have? And these initial 5 towns, how will they be chosen? And secondly, the Home Secretary said nothing in her statement about the powers these local inquiries will have. It seems they will not be statutory inquiries under the 2005 Act. That means these local inquiries will not have the power to compel witnesses to attend or to take evidence under oath or to requisition written evidence. So if that's the case, how can they possibly get to the truth when faced with cover-ups? In fact, it was precisely that problem, the lack of powers, that led the chairs of the Manchester local inquiry to reportedly resign last year, because they weren't given the information they needed by public authorities and they didn't have the powers required to force its release, and so they resigned.
Well, you heard it there from Chris Philp himself. These local council-led inquiries would not have the statutory powers to compel people to come forward and give evidence. So if someone did know something that might incriminate themselves or someone else, they could simply choose not to come forward and give that evidence. That's really insufficient. So these inquiries themselves are a total sham. In fact, this is why I was a bit sceptical of Nigel Farage's idea to have a private inquiry, crowdfund all the money and lead a private inquiry, because again, there would be no powers to compel anyone to come forward and give evidence. So I don't think that would really go anywhere. It's not what we want. Now, Chris Philp also said something else that was very interesting in that, because he queried exactly how these 5 towns would be chosen. And that might have seemed insignificant, but I don't think it is, because we know that Pakistani men were vastly overrepresented in committing these kinds of crimes. But it would not surprise me to see the Labour Party pick 4 towns where it was all done by white guys, because yes, some of this is being conducted by white guys, and then 1 town where it was being conducted by predominantly Pakistani men. Now, they would do that, again, to create a whitewash image and say, look, it's not really a big problem, stop talking about it, blah, blah, blah. So why exactly is Yvette Cooper so desperate to sweep this all under the rug? Well, one might speculate that it's because her husband, Ed Balls, might come out of this not looking too great. You see, Ed Balls, he was the Secretary of State for Schools, Children and Families between 2007 and 2010. I will leave you to make your own conclusions from that. But I think a more reasonable explanation is simply this. As I said in the last video, of these 50 towns that we've identified where we know this scandal has hit, almost all of them are Labour-run councils with Labour MPs. Listen to this clip from Raja Mir. He was an Oldham whistleblower, and he's talking about Labour's complicity in this.
He was an establishment figure in Oldham. We exposed, and the only reason we exposed this, so your people need to know, people need to understand, the only reason we exposed this was that sources from within the Labour Party contacted me to tell me, Raja, you need to know that this guy was one of ours. He was a prominent member of the Pakistani community in Oldham, an active member of the Labour Party, in and out of Michael Meacher's office at the time. Michael Meacher was the local MP. And to this day, prominent Muslim councillors who sit in that council had relationships with Daddy, and every one of them keep it secret. Not one of them will say anything. Labour,
yet again, directly exposed to this scandal. The extent to which they are exposed, we would only find out if we had a full and proper national inquiry. And that's why they will never grant one. But all of this raises another question in my mind. You see, we hear about these northern towns all the time, but we never hear anything about Greater London. Has this been happening in London as well? Well, Councillor Susie Hall posed exactly this question to Sadiq Khan, but he couldn't bring himself to give a straight answer. Take a listen to this.
So are you saying we haven't got the same sort of gangs that are in Rotherham, Bradford and lots of other places in the country?
Just for what's a misunderstanding, what does she mean by that?
You know full well what I mean by that. It's all over the television. You know exactly what I mean by that.
So there you have it, Sadiq Khan repeatedly dodging the question. It's actually a bit more than that, I think. I don't think he's just dodging the question. I think he's trying to bait Susie Hall into saying the word Pakistani, because that way he can change the question, reverse it, and make out that she's being racist somehow when she absolutely categorically is not. She's just asking the questions that people want answers to. I would say if we do ever get a national inquiry, they should probably take quite a close look at some of the communities in London and see whether this has actually affected there, but been perhaps very well covered up. That is pure speculation, of course. Now, there is one positive to come out of this, which is the public pressure and backlash is clearly working. It's having an effect. Labour are starting to crack just a little bit, and so we need to keep that public pressure going. It's absolutely essential. I also wanted to respond to a couple of points that were made in the comments. The first is the idea that a national inquiry can't prove guilt, and that is absolutely true. A national inquiry can't prove guilt, and you wouldn't expect it to because it's not a court of law. But what they can do quite simply is provide all of the details of times and dates and who was involved, what they knew when, what they did do, what they didn't do, and so on. Now that information is absolutely invaluable to detectives and prosecutors in building cases to ultimately, charge and hopefully sentence these people for their crimes and their complicity. So I still think an inquiry has a lot of purpose in that respect. The second point that I see often is people talking about the J report. Now the J report was a national inquiry into a very broad set of crimes, not focused on this one specific type of crime. It did, however, at the end lead to some recommendations. And a lot of people say, well, we just need to implement the J report recommendations. Look, nobody is stopping you from implementing those recommendations. You can do both. You can implement the J report recommendations and have a national inquiry. It's that straightforward. 76% of the British public want a national inquiry. If we live in a democracy, 76% is a majority. Give us the goddamn inquiry. It is that simple to me. She is actually a very camera shy little dog. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for all of your support on these videos, the likes, the comments, and the subscribes. If you're not already subscribed, there's probably a button somewhere up there where you can do so. I try in these videos to not waste your time and give you as much information as possible whilst also making it clear. I think some people on YouTube, I won't name names, but are in a bad habit of turning a 5-minute point into a 20-minute video. Nobody really needs that, you've got more important things to do in your life. So again, thank you very much. Thanks for your time, and I will see you on the next one.